and welcome back to what I will call Part 8 in the History of Evolution by Mr. Kent Hovind. Today we begin with the Who's Who in the Evolutionary Hall. Let's go on in the Who's Who in the Evolutionary Hall. We will continue in chronological order by their birth dates because the tangled web becomes rather difficult to decipher. Each of these men were working with each other or near each other. Sometimes they were not aware of others working in the same field. Sometimes they were very close companions. The next man we come to is Alfred Russel Wallace. He was born in 1823 and died in 1913. He was a contemporary with Darwin. He came up with several theories such as survival of the fittest. This was used by the capitalists in the 1800s to justify the annihilation of anyone who did not fit in. For instance, Rockefeller, Carnegie, and some of those early tycoons were ruthless in their business practices because they based their business practices on evolution. They said that only fittests could survive, so we will be the strongest and take over. With Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company, the way he used to monopolize the market was by buying out all the stations in a particular town. Any stations that refused to sell were literally driven out of business. For instance, if the price of gasoline was 20 cents a gallon, Rockefeller would instruct his people to sell it for 15 cents a gallon for a few months, just long enough to put the competitor out of business. When the other station would go out of business, he would have a corner on the market and jack his prices back up. The idea of evolution actually had its modern beginnings with Wallace. Darwin is given credit for it, but Wallace actually published his book first, nearly a year earlier. He emphasized a struggle for existence, the survival of the fittest, and natural selection. Wallace had very little education. He served at an apprenticeship for a while. He read Thomas Paine's book, The Age of Reason, as a teenager, and became very skeptical in matters of religion. He blended right in with the ideas of socialism, Marxism, and anarchism. He was heavily influenced by Malthus' book, and he believed in spiritism and the occult. Wallace was a pantheist, whereas Darwin became more and more of an atheist. They kind of split over the idea of whether there really was a God. Because of Wallace's spiritist, pantheist, and occultist teaching of evolution, he could really be considered the founding father of the New Age movement. He lived in Malaysia for about 8 years and watched the spiritist rituals that those people performed. He developed many of his theories in that setting. The New Age movement is nothing more than the old religion against God and the belief in evolution with a little Hindu and Buddhist religion mixed in with it. Let's continue our journey through the history of evolution. The next man we come to is Thomas Huxley. He was born in 1825 and died in 1895. Huxley was called Darwin's bulldog. He actively promoted Darwin's work after his publication of Origin of Species. He was very strong in his beliefs and anxious for Christianity to be overthrown. Thomas Huxley did not claim to be an atheist. He claimed to be an agnostic. He is the one that actually made up the term agnostic. He said that if there's no God, it doesn't matter. God had no part in his life. He was an English biologist and writer. He taught that ethics and morals had also evolved. He even wrote a book in the 1800s called Evolution and Ethics. He was very much a racist. Evolution lends itself readily to racism, which can be seen by the following quotes from Darwin and Huxley. At some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. At the same time, anthropomorphous apes will no doubt be the nearest allies will be wider, for it will be intervene between man and a more civilized state. As we may hope, even then the Caucasian and some ape, and as low as a baboon, instead of as now between the Negro or Australian and the gorilla. The Descent of Man, A. L. Burt Company, 1874, page 178. No rational man, cognizant of the fact, believes that the average Negro is the equal, so less the superior of the white man. And if this be true, it is simply incredible that when all of his disabilities are removed, and our prognathous relative has a fair field and no favor, as well as no oppressor, he will be able to compete successfully with his bigger-brained and smaller-jawed rival in a contest which is to be carried on by thought and not by bites. Lay Sermons, Addresses and Reviews, Appleton, 1871, page 20. Darwin's notion that the various races were at different evolutionary distances from the ape, with Negroes at the bottom and Caucasian at the top, was not unique to him, but rather was almost universal among the evolutionary scientists of the 19th century. Notice Huxley's argument that blacks could not compete intellectually with the Caucasians under equal and fair conditions. Racism started, or was greatly enhanced, by Darwin and Thomas Huxley. Huxley is the grandfather of two men who are also famous in evolutionary circles today, Sir Julian Huxley and Aldous Huxley. Thomas Huxley had been witness to on several occasions. Here is one quote from the Encyclopedia of Illustrations, number 6230, entitled Huxley's Sunday Talk, by J.B. Dingus. A friend of mine was once on a parliamentary commission with Professor T.H. Huxley. They happened to stay at a little country inn over Sunday. Huxley said to my friend, "I suppose you're going to church this morning." "I am. I always go to church." "I know you do," said Huxley. "But suppose this morning you sit down and talk with me about religion. Simple experimental religion." "I will," said my friend, "if you mean it." They sat down together, and my friend, out of a deep and rich experience, told him of the cross of Christ and pardoning love. And after 3 hours, tears stood in Huxley's eyes, and he could put out his hand and said, "If only I could believe that, I would be willing to give my right hand." What do you call that but intellectual imprisonment? Next, in our series, Part 9, we will continue with the journey through the history of evolution with Mr. Ernest Haeckel.